us to be there at the last moment, praying that we got in, just begging for a chance, and we got the chance. And he answered for us.
It's been a whirlwind. We were told at 8:45 we weren't going to be in, so I broke the news to the owners and my parents and some friends, and we had our 5 minutes of silence, started picking ourselves up, and I got another call at just before 9 saying, hey, hold on, something's going on. And then they told us we got in. The people that were standing around here, it sounded like we scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl, you know, I mean, it was crazy.
A few moments later.
Rich Strike is coming up on the inside. Oh my goodness, the longest shot has won the Kentucky Derby.
In the glittering world of thoroughbred racing, greatness is often bred, bought, and billed long before a horse ever steps onto the track. Bloodlines are scrutinized, trainers are selected from elite circles, and owners dream of roses and riches. In the spring of 2022, the build-up to the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby followed the usual script. Buzz surrounded blue-blooded favorites like Epicenter, Zandon, and Taiba. Million-dollar horses, top-tier connections, and lofty expectations shaped the narrative. No one, absolutely no one, was talking about Rich Strike. And why would they? The chestnut colt was bought for a meager $30,000 out of a claiming race, essentially a second-hand sale from the bottom tier of racing. That's a price closer to used trucks than Derby champions. On September 17, 2021, trainer Eric Reed claimed Rich Strike for owner Rick Dawson out of a maiden claiming race at Churchill Downs. That's right, Rich Strike had broken his maiden, won his first race, not in some elite showcase, but in a race where any owner with $30,000 could have taken him home. Yet in that same Churchill Downs paddock, where the rich and powerful stabled their seven-figure prospects, Rich Strike's destiny had been quietly rewritten. Bred in Kentucky by Calumet Farm, Rich Strike was a son of Keen Ice, a solid racehorse best known for defeating Triple Crown winner American Pharoah in the 2015 Travers Stakes. Keen Ice, while talented, never caught fire commercially as a stallion. His progeny were workmanlike. Not flashy, not hyped, but honest. Rich Strike's dam, Gold Strike, had been a Canadian champion in her own right, but her influence was considered modest in elite American breeding circles. So when Rich Strike was entered into a low-level claiming race, no one blinked. His early performances hadn't dazzled. He looked average, maybe useful, but certainly not Derby material. Trainer Eric Reed had seen something others didn't. A lanky colt with a big stride, heart, and untapped potential. He claimed Rich Strike, took him back to Mercury Equine Center, his training facility nestled in the rolling hills of Kentucky, and began the patient work of rebuilding the horse's mind and body. For Reed, the journey was deeply personal. In 2016, his training center suffered a devastating barn fire that killed 23 horses. The emotional and financial toll was immense. Many thought Reed would walk away from the sport entirely, but he rebuilt, slowly and with conviction. Rich Strike was not just another horse. He was a symbol of Reed's resilience. Throughout late 2021 and early 2022, Rich Strike remained under the radar. He finished third in the Leonidas Stakes, fourth in the John Battaglia Memorial, and third in the Jeff Ruby Stakes, all at Turfway Park. These were stepping-stone races, far from the glamour of Churchill Downs or Santa Anita. Despite modest success, Rich Strike hadn't accumulated enough qualifying points to secure a spot in the Kentucky Derby. He was placed on the also eligible list, a standby. The horses with higher points filled the 20-horse field. Barring a late scratch, Rich Strike wouldn't run. As late as Friday, May 6, 2022, the day before the Derby, Rich Strike's team assumed they would be watching the race on television. Eric Reed and Rick Dawson weren't even making plans for Churchill Downs. Their horse wasn't in. Then came the twist of fate that changed everything. On Friday morning, Ethical Racing Stables announced the scratch of Ethical Mischief, a talented colt who had drawn into the Derby but was withdrawn due to injury concerns. That scratch opened the door for Rich Strike, the 21st horse on the list, to draw into the field. He was added to the Derby gate just 30 seconds before the 9 a.m. deadline. Suddenly, Rich Strike was running in the biggest race in North America. The news shocked even his own team. Rick Dawson said he had no intention of pushing the horse into an unsuitable situation, but felt they had nothing to lose. Reed immediately began prepping his colt for the most prestigious race of his life. The team scrambled to secure logistics, press credentials, and race day gear. They were officially the longest shot on the board at 81, a horse who was not supposed to be in the race, who had never faced top company, who had never run a Grade 1 race, and who was now set to line up against the best of the best, May 7th, 2022. The sun shone brightly over Churchill Downs. More than 150,000 fans packed the grandstands, and millions more watched around the globe. Rich Strike, wearing saddlecloth 21, was virtually ignored. The betting windows buzzed with activity, but almost no one was putting money on the big chestnut colt from Mercury Training Center. When the gates opened, Rich Strike broke cleanly under journeyman jockey Sonny Leon, who had never ridden in the Kentucky Derby before. The early fractions of the race were blistering. Horses like Summer is Tomorrow and Messier set a torrid pace, with Epicenter stalking behind. Rich Strike dropped back to 18th early on, but Leon didn't panic. He guided his mount to the rail, allowing the colt to save ground while the leaders blazed ahead. The swift pace up front was setting the stage for a closer, and Rich Strike was waiting to pounce. As the field rounded the far turn, Leon asked Rich Strike for run, and the colt responded with an explosive kick. The TV cameras missed it at first. All eyes were on Epicenter and Zandon battling it out at the top of the stretch. Then, like a bolt of lightning from the rail, Rich Strike appeared. He weaved through tiring horses, took a narrow inside path that required bravery from both horse and rider, and burst into the lead with just strides to go. Rich Strike is coming up the inside. "Oh my goodness, the longest shot has won the Kentucky Derby," cried the stunned track announcer. In 2:02:61, Rich Strike had completed one of the most improbable victories in the 148-year history of the Derby. The crowd gasped. The betting boards lit up. The connections hugged and wept in disbelief. In the box, moments after the Derby, stunned reporters swarmed the connections. Eric Reed broke down in tears as he tried to explain what had just happened. "I fell down when he hit the wire," he said. "I passed out. I'm so happy." Rick Dawson was nearly speechless. "We didn't enter the Derby with the idea of winning. We just wanted to give the horse a chance to prove he belonged." Sonny Leon, previously unknown to most racing fans, became an instant celebrity. His ride was hailed as one of the most patient and gutsy in recent memory. He'd guided Rich Strike through a needle's-eye path, threaded between weakening horses, and timed his move perfectly. Bettors who had dared to take a flyer on Rich Strike were handsomely rewarded. The win payoff was $163.60 on a $2 bet, the second longest odds in Derby history behind only Donerail in 1913. In the days following the Derby, the Underdog triumph dominated headlines. But with fame came scrutiny. Some questioned whether Rich Strike's win was a fluke. Others critiqued the decision by Dawson and Reed to skip the Preakness Stakes, the second leg of the Triple Crown. Their reasoning was straightforward. Rich Strike needed rest. The Derby win had taken a toll, and they didn't want to compromise the horse's future by pushing him into another demanding race just 2 weeks later. The move was praised by some as horse-first thinking and derided by others as a missed opportunity to pursue immortality. Regardless, it was consistent with the Underdog team's values. They didn't care for fame or media pressure. They cared about their horse. Rich Strike returned in the Belmont Stakes, the final leg of the Triple Crown, where he finished 6th. It was a respectable performance, though not magical. In subsequent races, including the Travers Stakes and Lucas Classic, he continued to show flashes of ability, but did not win again that season. Still, None of that could take away the luster of May 7th, 2022. In one race, Rich Strike had rewritten what was possible. He wasn't bred for millions, he wasn't trained by a legend or ridden by a household name. He had come from the bottom and climbed to the very top. Eric Reed, a man who nearly left the sport after tragedy, became a national hero. Sonny Leon went from the obscurity of minor racing circuits to the pages of Sports Illustrated. Rich Strike became a symbol, not of what money can buy, but of what belief can build. Underdogs captivate us not because they are expected to win, but because they remind us that expectations can be shattered. Rich Strike's story is more than a sporting upset. It's a narrative of perseverance, of seeing value where others see failure, of believing when the world doesn't. He was the horse no one wanted, the trainer who'd lost everything, the owner who took a risk, the jockey few had heard of. Together, they stunned the racing world. The 2022 Kentucky Derby will be remembered not for a record time or a flashy favorite, but for a deep, improbable surge up the rail by a horse who was literally not supposed to be there. Rich Strike's Derby win is the kind of story that transcends racing. It belongs in the canon of sporting miracles alongside Leicester City's Premier League title, the 1980 U.S. Olympic hockey team's Miracle on Ice, and Buster Douglas knocking out Mike Tyson. Is a reminder that greatness doesn't always wear the expected colors. Sometimes it sneaks in through the back gate, gets into the race at the last second, and finds magic between the rail and the roar of the crowd. When Rich Strike crossed the finish line at Churchill Downs, he wasn't just winning a race, he was defying gravity, fate, and every assumption in the sport. That's not just a win. That's a legacy.